keepers. When you get big and ugly with them. That one looks like a mallard. Those hands over it. Don't look alike, do they?
I'm descended from, let's see, Elizabeth and John Carter Jr. You see, he was in the Revolution. The one signifies the war that they fought in. And then Margaret and John Gass, another ancestor. Major John Harmon, another one. Mary Britton and Joshua Kittle, another one. Catherine Cooper and Robert Maloney. And look, he didn't fight in the Revolution. It was the War of 1812. But the way that we were able to restore the big spring, and by the way, this is the reason why Greenville started, was the spring here. 500,000 gallons of water a day bubble up out of the earth. Right here, see this hole over here? This comes up out of the earth. And this served as the water supply of Greenville until 1937. From the time our free town was founded 200 years ago until 1937, the chief source of our water was the big spring. And, well, I better wait till the others come because I'll have to repeat. So just look around and enjoy out of the earth and come out right here where this hole is in the stone wall. And until 1937, this spring served as our water supply. There used to be a house built over it, a brick house that more or less kept the spring enclosed so that it couldn't be polluted. But it was not enclosed until after 1914. There was a terrible typhoid epidemic in Greenville. You know, typhoid used to be one of the killers there of that and scarlet fever, particularly as children. And a great many people died of typhoid, and they traced it to the big spring. And so that's when the enclosure was done. But after 1937, our water supply, of course, comes from the Nolichucky River. And so the Heritage Trust, of all the projects we've ever done, this is my favorite, because it means so much to so many people. Every day, nurses from the Laughlin Hospital and different places will come here and spread their lunches and enjoy the park which has been created here. But this was the reason why the pioneers settled Greenville in the first place, because of the abundance of a large water supply. An Indian was drinking from the creek one day in the 1780s, and Azariah Doughty, who was the ancestor of Martha Ferris, if any of you know Martha, killed the Indian, and his body floated in the water, and I suppose it eventually ended in the Nolichucky River. Because you know the name of the creek which starts here at the big spring? Let's see a hand. Nancy, do you? Richland Creek. All right, the creek is called Richland Creek. It flows all through Greenville and down through the Andrew Johnson property and out the Lonesome Pine Trail, we used to call it, the old Asheville Highway, and it empties into the Nolichucky just below Phil Bachman's farm, which is across the road from Leak Hills Country Club. I want to tell you something about this willow tree. There are a lot of willow trees in Greenville, and most of them came from a willow tree which grew on the property of Andrew Johnson. A friend of Johnson's was making a trip around the world in the 1840s, and he stopped on the island of St. Helena in the South Atlantic and visited the grave of Napoleon. The huge willow tree grew over Napoleon's grave, and this friend of Johnson broke off several switches of the tree, put them in water, brought them back, and gave them to Johnson. And these willows, this is one of them, and the ones at the rear of the Andrew Johnson home are descended from the willow tree that grew over the grave of Napoleon. How many of you knew that? Nancy, she's heard me before. The way that the Heritage Trust was able to create the bicentennial park and to restore the spring and build a beautiful little bridge was because of this plaque over here. Anyone who so desired could put a name on the plaque of somebody who had lived in Greenville, or even if they didn't live in Greenville, an ancestor, and every name on the plaque represents $100. And from that plaque, we were able to raise $35,000, which went into the restoration of the big spring, and it means so much to so many people. I guess that's why it's my favorite project of the Heritage Trust. Now, class, are there any questions before we proceed to the capital of the state of Franklin? What is the date given for the founding of Greenville? Nancy? 1783, but there were people here as early as the 1770s. For instance, First Presbyterian Church that you can see the spire up there was founded in 1780. Well, you couldn't have a church being founded without people who found it, could you? So the 1783 date is taken because that is the year that Greene County was established as a county of North Carolina. We're older than the state of Tennessee. We were first Greene County, North Carolina. Then in 1784 to 88, we became Greene County, state of Franklin. From 1788 to 90, we were Greene County, North Carolina once more. From 1790 to 1796, we were Greene County, territory southwest of the River Ohio. And finally, in 1796, we became Greene County, Tennessee. But you see, we're older than the state. Now, did you all know that?
No.
Now you do. All right, let's go across to the anytime you have a question, I'll be happy to attempt that. In 1784, the news got to this part of North Carolina, from which, of course, North Carolina extended to the Mississippi River, that the western country, embracing what is now the whole state of Tennessee, had been given to the federal government. Well, the people here didn't like the idea of being given away without even being consulted. So in 1784, they met in Jonesboro and founded what they call the state of Franklin, named in honor of Benjamin Franklin, because he had so much prestige that it was felt that he would use his influence to get us recognized as the 14th state. By the way, we only missed it by the narrow vote of 1 in the Continental Congress. But anyway, in 1784, the first meeting was held in Jonesboro, and then in 1785, Greenville was made the permanent capital, and this is an exact replica of the Capitol building. Now, it didn't stand on this spot. Where do you suppose it originally stood? You know, Nancy?
Corner of the courthouse road?
No, just where Main and Depot Streets cross, so we didn't think it'd be very feasible to restore it on the original, but it was in the cross of the street where Main and Depot, we call it Mason Corner or whatever you want to call it, but anyway, this is an exact replica. The size, and by the way, the logs are as old as 1784. They were brought from a log house down in the Glenwood community. I think it was on the Easterly farm, if I'm not mistaken, and the dimensions follow those given in J.G.M. Ramsey's Annals of Tennessee. It's an exact replica as far as size, the stone chimney, and whatnot. And the deliberations of the lower house of the legislature of Franklin met in a house similar to this. The deliberations of the Senate met in Robert Carr's home, which was on the spot of the site of the First Baptist Church. How many of you have ever noticed the marker that says Robert Carr, spelled K-E-R-R? Good for you. You know the Scottish pronunciation is Carr. Remember the actress Deborah? I always said Deborah Carr, act with star. And that's the Scottish pronunciation. And Robert Carr was the one who owned the entire site of downtown Greenville. He had 300 acres. And he, when it was decided what would be the county seat of Greene County, Carr said, if you will establish it on my property, I will give 60-odd acres. The other claimants for the honor were Raytown and Warrensburg. But of course, Greenville, more nearly in the center of the county, it was a logical choice, and of course the fact that Carr's offer that tipped the scales in favor of Greenville. And of course we're named in honor of Nathaniel Greene, who next to George Washington is considered the foremost general of the American Revolution. And many of the people who settled this area had served in General Greene's army in North Carolina and in South Carolina. Greene was a Quaker from the state of Rhode Island, the colony of Rhode Island. And you know the Quakers are against war. And by his going into the war, his whole family turned against him. He never went back to Rhode Island. He settled a plantation down in Savannah, near Savannah, Georgia, and he's buried, if I'm not mistaken, in Savannah. There's a Greene William Monument there. And of course, we're the only Greenville in the United States to do what? Retain that middle E. You know, one time I tested this. I was in New York City, and I wrote a letter to myself for an envelope, and I addressed it, and I put Greenville, and underscored the E and didn't put Tennessee. Anyway, the state of Franklin lasted from 1784 to 1788, and then it passed off the scene, and the authority of North Carolina was restored once more. Well, there's some of the Joneses. Wanda and Katie. Any questions now before we proceed? I want to say something about the state markers. Of course, out here in front of the Capitol is a state marker. Greenville has more of these state markers than any other town in the state of any other town in Tennessee except Nashville. Of course, every few feet you go to something at the Battle of Nashville. But I think we're quite on. There are between 15 and 20 in the environs of Greenville of these state markers, which shows how very historic our town is. How many of you knew who Benjamin Lundy was? All right, let's go across the street and you can read that. Maybe I better back the other man. Come on, let's get closer to Greene County, Tennessee. Wait a minute, excuse me. He moved to Greenville from North Carolina. And he published a paper here called The Genius of Universal Emancipation from 1820 to 1830. Most people don't realize the cemetery, Old Harmony. It was founded in 1790, and somewhere in an unmarked grave, the founder of Greenville, Robert Carr, is buried here. We don't know where. But anywhere you walk in this cemetery, you're walking over graves because it served as the burial ground of Greenville from 1790 until 1883, when Oak Grove Cemetery was established. But there are literally hundreds of graves in this cemetery. The upper corner is quite interesting. You see that pretty green spot up there near the fence? That's the cholera section. In 1873, there was a cholera epidemic in Greenville, and people were dying like flies. In fact, they could not dig individual graves. They just dug trenches and buried people just as fast as they could. And I know when we were doing some restoration over here and setting up some of the stones, several people sent us word saying, don't reactivate the cholera. So I hope we did. But there are some very interesting graves here in the cemetery. Over here, this very imposing obelisk is Valentine Sevier, who had 14 children. I think that would be an accomplishment in itself. He was married twice. One wife had 12 children, and the other one had 2.
Was his wife.
We have. Tennessee Williams sent a contribution of $500, and that's what built the wall down along the right over for which McKee Street is named. But you see the name here on the wrought iron fence, and some of the stones go back to the 1790s. To my knowledge, there's not a McKee descendant left, but just to show you the age of the cemetery, look at the size of this tree. It's in the Dixon Williams mansion, and the 2 above ground stones, and by the way, the bodies were not placed there, they were buried below ground, but the monuments were erected in that form. Those are the graves of William Dixon and his wife Eliza Douglas Dixon, and he was the first postmaster of Greenville, and his commission was signed in 1797. And it's down at the Nathaniel Green Museum, the actual commission. It's an interesting fact to me about William Dixon. He emigrated to Greenville from County Antrim in Northern Ireland, and 1 year after he was appointed postmaster of our town, he was naturalized an American citizen. And his naturalization certificate is also dated 27. And this enclosure here is the Rumbo family, and one of the stones that, the 2 are Jacob Rumbo and Anne Dandridge Sutherland Rumbo, and we have portraits of them which are hanging down in the 1st Tennessee Ranch temporarily until they transferred to the mansion. The United States is named for her maiden name. But anyway, this woman here was her niece, and she married Jacob Rumbo. They came to Greenville with the building of the East Tennessee Virginia Railroad in 1858, and it was their daughter, Lucy Rumbo, that married Joseph Williams, and she is probably the one, I think, that Rob Russell, no farm Steve and Caroline, that may have been the betrayer of General Morgan. She's the one I think did it anyway. I have a lot I can tell you about her. This Richmond Creek down here behind the tail shop. And he bought this home from Mordecai Lincoln and lived here in the 1830s until he purchased the house on Saskatoon in 1851. But this is a little den of federal architects building.
Dick, this door's open.
How are you, Mr.?
That's where I'm most comfortable speaking to large crowds. I'm the chief ranger here at the site, and it's sort of unusual to have a crowd down here after dinner, so welcome. I've had my fill, and I understand you all had your fill as well, so we'll make this a fun venture. How many of you have been here before to the site? Well, not everybody. Good. Well, most of you know that Andrew Johnson, of course, was our 17th president of the United States, but a lot of folks don't realize that he had a very interesting career before he was president. Adam Taylor, a very humble career back in the 1800s. And the historic structure that you see behind me is his tailor shop that he operated out of while he was a tailor here in Greenville. And it's sort of unique because the state of Tennessee back in the 1920s built this structure around it, realizing the historic significance of Andrew Johnson and those humble beginnings. What I'd like to talk with you all about this evening, though, is sort of what I talk about to school groups when they come to visit us, because a lot of folks don't realize the importance of Andrew Johnson in the role of education. The things that we do know, of course, about Andrew Johnson, he was born in Raleigh, North Carolina, to a very poor family. His father died when he was very young, and his mother sort of had to struggle to bring up two boys, Andrew and his brother William. The interesting thing is back during that time period, in the early 1800s, they didn't have trade schools where they could send their children off to. What they would do is they would make them become indentured servants. An indentured servant basically is where the male children are basically given to a craftsman, whether it be a blacksmith or a carpenter, or in Andrew and his brother William's case, a tailor. And they would work for what was supposed to be 7 years, learning the trade of a tailor, and then off they would go on their own. Well, as all young boys do, Andrew and his brother William and some of their friends, and this is hearsay, not a whole lot of strong documentation on this story, but I'll pass it on to you as well, got in trouble in Raleigh, North Carolina. Supposedly they broke out some windows of a prominent lady's home over there on the other side of the mountains. Now, of course, back in the 1800s, who all had the glass? Did everybody have glass in their windows back then? No. Only the more well-to-do families had glass in their homes. When Andrew Johnson broke out the window, of course, being an indentured servant, he wasn't making any money to pay for the damage. And we only speculate as to why he ran away, but he ran away. He ran away across the mountains to Tennessee and then came through Greenville. And when he came through Greenville, there was already a tailor here, so he didn't stay.
Now you know what his name was?
Oh, you're going to quiz me. I knew I should write it down. What was it? Go ahead, Dick.
Robert Maloney. He was my great-great-grandson.
Oh. So what happened is when he came through Greenville, he continued on his journeys because there was no place for him to open up a shop here. But he must have got homesick somewhere along the way, because I believe when he was 17, he went back to Raleigh, North Carolina, I guess to make amends, to ask for forgiveness and to pay for any damages. For whatever the reason, Mr. Shelby, the man who he had been indentured to, refused his proposal. And so Andrew Johnson loaded up his mother and his stepfather and brought him over the mountains into Greenville for their first time, but his second time. When he passed through Greenville this time, though, the tailor that had been here had moved on. So where did he move to?
He retired.
He retired.
Yeah, getting old. He had 12 children. I guess he was.
Well, that would tire me out too, let me tell you. So Andrew Johnson set up shop here. What's real important, though, about Andrew Johnson setting up shop here in Greenville is that there are some important things you need to be a successful tailor. And obviously, he was a successful tailor. Have to have a basic skill in mathematics, have to know how to read and write. And Andrew Johnson never attended school a day of his life. So he was basically a self-educated man. And that's one of the things that we share with the students that come to the site here, is this drive within this man to become a self-educated individual. But the important part of Andrew Johnson's story is that when he went on to be governor of the state of Tennessee, he realized the importance of a public education. Because, now remember back in this time, if you wanted to send your children to school, there were no state taxes. You had to pay for your child to go to school. So whose children went to school? The people who were well-to-do, the people who could afford to send their children to school. So that meant children such as Andrew Johnson, as his case was in North Carolina, who were poor, were unable to have that sort of help to compete with these children who were going to school. So what he did as the governor of Tennessee is he introduced legislation to a tax for public education. So he's the father, basically, of public education here in Tennessee. So if our governor today wants to point a finger at somebody for all the educational problems, you can always look back at Andrew Johnson's administration and scold him. Also, Andrew Johnson not having his basic education, a lot of folks wonder, well, where did he learn to read, write, and do math? We do know that Mr. Shelby over in Raleigh, North Carolina, would bring people in to read to the tailors, the newspapers, political books, and whatnot. So Andrew Johnson must have had some basic education, and he must have had some basic education in math offered by his indentured servant, or the man who had him as an indentured servant, to measure and whatnot the material for his patterns and clothing. So we do know that he had some basic education, but we give a lot of credit to his wife, Eliza McCardle. She was a local Greenville graduate of the Rhea Academy, so she had some education, and I would strongly suspect that she taught him a great bit of reading, writing, and math. That's quite evident in a lot of the documents you read that Andrew Johnson wrote. His spelling and writing gets much better as time goes on. So he was self-educating himself. That's just one of the stories that I share with school kids when they come to visit. It's sort of a very simple one. But the main point of that, the thrust of it is to let the school kids know that, even though you don't have an education, the important part is that they're already a step ahead of Andrew Johnson. Here was a man who took the time to be self-educated, and that they've got teachers now that help them pull themselves up by the bootstrap, and so they're just one step further ahead than what Andrew Johnson was. So their potential should be limitless as well. What I'd like you to do, and I know Dick will probably talk to you a little bit through the museum, feel free to ask me questions. And of course, most of you know that Dick is a wonderful author of a book on Greenville that he has autographed in our bookstore. So if you're interested there, after listening to Dick talk, you probably want to look at his book. So
He's trying to sell it.
Well,
Johnson was plying his trade. Notice that he sat on the table, at the very table as in the potato shop, and he was so eager to get an education that he walked to Greenville College, which is about 6 miles out towards Asheville, and then when Greenville College closed for a while, he walked to Tuscaloosa to take part in these debates. And so he was so eager to get an education that even though he never went to school a day in his life, he was well educated to the time he became the governor of Tennessee, then senator, and then finally the president. Are there any questions? Mayor of Greenville in the 1830s. He served in the State House of Representatives and the State Senate. He served 10 years, 5 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives in Washington. He was gerrymandered out of his district, and he came back, and instead of taking that lying down, he ran for governor of Tennessee and was elected 2 terms, from 1853 to 1857. Then in 57, he was elected to the United States Senate and was serving there when the Civil War broke out, and he was the only Southern senator to retain his seat during the Civil War, something that I am very proud of as a Cumberland Presbyterian. The pastor of our church, Reverend John P. Holsinger, drove Andrew Johnson to Cumberland Gap in his own buggy and got him out of Greenville, because the chances are Johnson would have been taken into custody, and that part of American history would have just closed right there. But anyway, Holsinger took Johnson to Cumberland Gap. He subsequently went to Louisville and then took a train to Cincinnati and Washington. And because of his loyalty in 1862, after the battles of Fort Henry and Donelson, Johnson was asked by Lincoln to become the military governor of Tennessee with the rank of brigadier general in the Army. And while he was military governor, he used that desk, and doesn't it have his name on the side of it here? Honorable A. Johnson. And of course, it was a desk that could fold up and you could travel around. He stayed in Nashville in 1864 when Lincoln tapped him to be his running mate for vice president, not on the Republican ticket, but on what was known as the National Union ticket. Abraham Lincoln, a Republican, and Andrew Johnson, a war Democrat. Johnson was a lifelong Democrat. That was something even the Encyclopedia Britannica made a mistake one time. I think it's substantively
Well,
correct.
that's going to repeat itself. I'm just going to ask Clinton to repeat it.
No comment. Anyway, Johnson became president, and then something that's so vitally interesting to me about Johnson, after he returned to Greenville in March of 1869, after having served as president, impeachment and all that, he was re-elected to the United States Senate, the only ex-president ever to be returned to the Senate. John Quincy Adams was re-elected to the House of Representatives, but Johnson to the U.S. Senate. Now, if we're coming here to be which has been replicated on the campus out of Tusculum College. And then it shows the reward which was offered when he ran away. And here you see a coat that he made for Dr. Francis Fowler, a wedding coat in 1839. Johnson's shears and his brush. And this iron is called a goose. And what do you suppose the plural is? Gooses. Not geese, but gooses. A tailor's goose, the proper plural is gooses. You look, it's impeachment. But remember, impeachment does not mean conviction. It's simply the bringing of charges against a public official. If you're accused of a crime, that doesn't mean you're guilty, does it? Well, that's all an impeachment is, an indictment. And he was acquitted with a narrow margin of 1 vote. Senator Edmund Ross of Kansas, whose picture is behind you there. See Ross? And he was a Republican, and he was the one who cast the deciding vote that Johnson should be acquitted. And because of that, he was ruined politically. He was virtually run out of the state of Kansas. He took refuge in Arizona, New Mexico, and as far as politics was concerned, he was capable.
There were 5 Republicans who voted, 5 or 7, I think 5.
You pronounce that, it's pronounced jail, but that's the old spell. There has been a jail on this spot since 1794, and the 70, by the way, I wrote that inscription to the state if you want to touch it. In fact, I've written a lot of these inscriptions. But there was a jail, a log jail here, it was early 1794, and it was stopped since
On your way? I hope not.
and the idea of that was not that. This was the stone part is much earlier than the brick part, which was, as you see the side of the brick part. By the way that these stones, the way the stones are cut is really, it's work of art. And we think that perhaps stonemasons coming from Italy or someplace else did the way that the stones are fitted so perfect. Notice the huge slabs here in the floor. And of course, there's an old steel here. I don't think that has anything to do with the jail, except that maybe people who operate it might find themselves in there. But notice these little cells here with the iron doors. Well, anyway, this will just give you some idea of how prisoners were not pampered over 100 years ago. How would you like to spend a few nights in one of these little cells? I think that'd make the believer get a winner.
This making an impression on kids, I'll tell you what. Oh, yeah.
Well, but you see that this one's nicer than downstairs because there's the little commode here and the double deck club. It's still not too luxurious, but more comfortable than those downstairs.
I went over to bed and breakfast.
Yeah. Well, that's an idea. And the statue here of a Union soldier was erected about 1916 by the General Burnside Post of the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, which was a veterans organization of Union EXEDRA. You see quite a few of them in Gettysburg. Yeah, 1918. And it's to commemorate the state of Franklin and John Sevier. Now what's the word? Exedra, E-X-E-D-R-A. And on all sides of this Union, the Congressional Medal of Honor posthumously, I wrote the inscription on the Union Convention. Okay, well, this is a nice building. convened the two meetings, Tennessee had seceded. The Greenville Convention went on and was held, and a memorial was adopted at this convention and was sent to the state legislature asking that East Tennessee be allowed to remain in the Union and be excused from the rest of the state. And the answer of the government in Nashville was the dispatching of the Confederate Army into East Tennessee under the command of General Felix Zollicott, very misspelled names there. And he occupied all the towns on the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad. Now, whether you realize this or not, young people, the East Tennessee was the prize of the Confederacy. We didn't grow cotton, but armies can't eat cotton. We grew tremendous amounts of food, and the East Tennessee and Virginia Railroad joined at Chattanooga to the East Tennessee and Georgia, happened to be the chief supply route for General Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. And so East Tennessee, the Confederacy was determined to hold on to East Tennessee at all costs. It's an interesting fact that the part of our state that wanted to stay in the Union was the last part that was given up, and there were Confederate troops here until the very end of the war. In fact, it was said that Greenville exchanged hands about 40 times between the two. I've heard it said that a lot of the families, I can document it, they kept two flags, Confederate flag. This church was originally founded at the Big Spring by the Reverend Samuel Oak in 1780. And Reverend Hezekiah Boston became the first settled pastor in 1783. And the original name of the church was Mount Bethel. Well, because of that friction between Oak and Boston, the church split. And so the Oak faction kept the name Mount Bethel, and this faction, Boston, took the name Mount. And then the name was changed to Fire, and the original church. Shipped down to some port in South Carolina, Hamburg or Charleston, and was brought across the mountains by oxen. And I was told that the schools of Greenville were turned out when the organ was brought here, and it was assembled by Paul G. Rosenblatt, who had immigrated to Greenville from Leipzig, Germany. And as long as he lived, Mr. Rosenblatt kept the organ in good shape. It was first played when the church was consecrated in 1850. Bishop James Doughty, who was the first Episcopal bishop of Tennessee, came to Greenville for the consecration service. And this area up here where the choir sits now was originally a slave yard. Because immigration is nothing new. Before the Civil War, it was customary for masters to bring their slaves to church with them. And they usually sit here on back pews or in the gallery. The Presbyterian Church has a slave gallery, and also New Bethel Cumberland Presbyterian Church out on the Rogersville Road. It's just a little museum. If any of you have ever been in that church, it's just absolutely beautiful. It has a marble pulpit and the original oil lamps in the church, and also this wonderful slave gallery. I don't know whether the electricity's turned on or not. All right. used to be hand pumped, by the way. See the pump back there? The lever? But anyway, it was later electrified. By the way, all these pews are solid walnut, and the walnut was all cut out in the vicinity of Otway. The Williams family had a mill at Otway. It was called Williams Mill, and they owned so much land up and down Lick Creek. Andrew Johnson literally despised Dr. Williams, and he referred to him as Alexander the Great, the Grand Duke of Lick Creek. Any questions? General Morgan hid in the basement of the church. I've never understood when he was warned that the federal forces were here and they were after him, that he ran this way, because the Williams stables happened to be across Depot Street where J.C. Penney was, where Doughty Stevens is now. And why he didn't go that way instead of coming this way, I've never understood. The chances are, if he had, he might have escaped and not been killed. But it's the way the cookie crumbles. All right, let's go up the street. K. Johnson was here after Dr. Williams' death. As long as Dr. Williams was alive, they were just bitter political enemies. During the Civil War, Mrs. Williams had one son in the Confederate Army, one in the Union Army, two in the Confederate Army. So whenever the officers were in Greenville, they used this house as the headquarters. When we started taking the plaster off, we came across the original beams, and we didn't know exactly how the stairway, some of the things have been done through, as Bill Guest says, educated guesses. But we were able to determine the stairway because this beam right here stopped. And these places came into this, and so we knew exactly where the stairway went up. The room above here housed the slaves who worked in the house. Now, I have an idea there's probably 4 or 5 beds at one time. And it's an interesting thing. The only way that you get from this part of the house into the main house is through the dining room door. And after the Nat Turner slave rebellion, I just talk with my hands all the time. After the Nat Turner slave rebellion in 1831, I am convinced that that door was probably kept locked at night. But anyway, the kitchen here, when we uncovered, took the plaster off, we found the original opening, original configuration of the kitchen fireplace. Look how huge it is. You could roast a pig. And a local blacksmith, Russell Odell, copied or replicated the crane and also the hooks, and he made the hand irons. He did a beautiful job. In fact, all the work was done, and this is something I take very good credit. It's been done by local craftsmen. And most of these are things we're very comfortable to sleep on. They had a bed iron, or a bed wrench, I think they called it, and every so often they would have to tighten up the cords, and that was the origin of the term sleep tight. Anyway, this is an antique. This 200-year-old room has been given to us by Harry. They opened the walls and took the plaster off and found the original. You wouldn't believe the amount of restoration we've done already. For instance, there were all kinds of things. Well, where you see these hospital.